Friends, thank you for being here today. We need to have a serious, difficult, and necessary conversation. It is a conversation that the mainstream financial media refuses to have with you, and one that your political representatives are terrified to acknowledge. It concerns the immediate future of your financial security, the legacy you intend to leave for your children, and the structural reality of the United States economy. I want to start with a number that is difficult to comprehend, yet vital to understand. 127 million. According to the most comprehensive analysis of current asset distribution, 127 million Americans are currently standing on the precipice of a total financial reset. They are about to lose everything they own. When I say lose everything, I'm not referring to a temporary dip in the stock market or a cyclical recession that recovers in 18 months. I'm referring to a permanent mathematical destruction of wealth that will wipe out the accumulated savings of the American middle class. Most of these 127 million people, perhaps you are among them, have no idea this is coming. They have followed the rules, they have saved their money, they have invested in 401ks, they have bought bonds, they have trusted the pension systems, they have believed in the promise that if they worked hard and saved in US dollars, their future would be secure. I want to pause here and ask you a question, and I want you to answer honestly in the comments. Do you feel wealthier today than you did 5 years ago? Or do you feel like you are running faster just to stay in the same place? Let me know below. But right now, as you read this, the United States federal government is sitting on a debt load of over $36.2 trillion. That is trillion with a T. We crossed this threshold in January 2025, and the trajectory of debt accumulation is now accelerating faster than at any point since World War II. But the raw number, as terrifying as it is not the primary issue. The issue is that we have crossed a mathematical event horizon. In the entirety of recorded human economic history, spanning over 2,000 years, no empire, kingdom, or republic has ever crossed the debt to GDP threshold we are currently at without experiencing catastrophic consequences. This is not a political statement. It is not an opinion. It is a matter of historical record and mathematical certainty. What few are willing to tell you is that this crisis is not unique. It is not unprecedented. To the average observer, the chaos in the economy might look like a series of unfortunate random events. But to the student of history, it is a pattern. It is a pattern that has repeated itself exactly 27 times over the last 2 millennia. Every single time, without exception, the outcome was the same: total wealth destruction for the majority, a massive transfer of assets to a minority who understood the cycle, and a complete restructuring of the economic order. We are currently in stage 3 of this 4-stage pattern. There's only one stage left. The purpose of this analysis is to show you the mechanism behind this collapse so that you can stop operating on hope and start operating on reality. History does not repeat, but as Mark Twain famously said, it rhymes perfectly. To understand where we are going, we must first strip away the noise of daily news cycles and examine the mechanism behind this collapse. It does not matter if we are discussing ancient Rome, Weimar Germany, or the United States in 2025. The players change, the technology advances, and the propaganda becomes more sophisticated, but the underlying mathematical reality remains identical. Every economic collapse follows the same 4-stage life cycle. It begins with stage 1, the foundation. This is the era of stability. A nation or empire establishes a currency system that is trusted, usually because it is backed by a hard asset like gold or silver. Because the currency is sound, commerce flourishes. People trust that the money they earn today will hold its value 10 years from now. This encourages saving and long-term investment. Wealth accumulates. Trade expands. Society creates excess capital. This stage can last for decades or even centuries. The longer it lasts, the more invincible the society feels. The memory of poverty or instability fades, and the population begins to believe that their prosperity is a permanent state of nature rather than the result of discipline. This leads us inevitably to stage 2, expansion and debasement. This is the turning point. Eventually, the government, whether it is an emperor, a king, or Congress, needs more money than it can collect in taxes. The reasons are always noble or urgent. A war that must be fought, a social program to help the poor, or simply the mismanagement and corruption of the ruling class. However, they cannot raise taxes sufficiently to cover these costs because the population would revolt. So they choose the path of least resistance. They debase the currency. In ancient times, this meant melting down coins and mixing in cheap base metals. In modern times, it means printing paper currency or creating digital reserves. At first, this feels like a miracle. The new money floods the system. The economy seems to boom, credit flows freely. Asset prices, stocks, real estate, bonds, soar to record highs. Everyone feels richer on paper because their home value went up or their stock portfolio increased. But it is an illusion. The value of the assets hasn't changed. The unit of measurement, the currency, is simply shrinking. This is the stage of delusion. From there, we arrive at where we are today. Stage 3, the loss of control. In this stage, the debt becomes mathematically unpayable. We are no longer talking about it being politically difficult to pay off the national debt. We are talking about it being chemically impossible. The interest payments alone begin to consume the entire budget. Inflation moves from being a nuisance to being a persistent threat. The government tries to solve the problem of debt by printing more money, which causes more inflation, which requires more printing. A feedback loop begins. Smart money, those with generational wealth and historical understanding, quietly exits the currency. They sell their paper promises and buy hard assets, gold, silver, land, and productive businesses. Meanwhile, the government tries desperately to maintain the illusion of control. They manipulate economic statistics. They institute price controls. They blame greedy corporations or foreign adversaries. They use propaganda to tell the public that the economy is strong. But the mathematics of the debt cannot be spun. Finally, we face the inevitable conclusion. Stage 4, the collapse. This is the outcome the system cannot avoid. The currency system fails. This happens in one of two ways. One path is hyperinflation, where the currency loses all value, and your life savings effectively go to zero purchasing power. The other path is a deflationary default, where the banking system seizes up, credit vanishes, and the institutions holding your wealth, banks, pension funds, insurance companies, fail. In either scenario, the middle class, the productive backbone of society, is destroyed. The wealth does not disappear from the planet, it is transferred. It transfers from those who held paper currency to those who held real assets. Then, a new system is born and the cycle begins again. This is not a theory. I am going to prove it to you by examining 3 distinct moments in history. Let us begin with the greatest empire the world had ever known, Rome. In the 1st century AD, the Roman denarius was the global reserve currency. It was a silver coin, minted with 95% purity. If you were a merchant in Syria, a soldier in Gaul, or a trader in Egypt, you accepted the denarius because you trusted its silver content. It was the bedrock of the Pax Romana. Stage 1, foundation. But empires are expensive. Nero and the emperors who followed him had insatiable appetites for construction, wars, and maintaining public favor through bread and circuses. They could not tax the citizens enough to pay for it all, so they turned to debasement. They recalled the silver coins, melted them down, mixed in cheap copper or bronze, and reminted them with the same face value but less silver. They reduced the purity from 95% to 90%, then 85%. It seemed harmless at first. The coins looked the same. The emperor's face was still on them. But the laws of economics are absolute. By 217 AD, under Emperor Caracalla, the denarius was only 50% silver. By 270 AD, under Aurelian, it had collapsed to less than 5% silver. The coin was essentially a piece of worthless bronze with a thin silver wash that rubbed off in your pocket. Stage 2, debasement. The consequences were horrific. In 1 AD, a pound of gold could purchase roughly 40 pounds of wheat. This was a stable ratio of labor to value. By 300 AD, that same pound of gold bought 120,000 pounds of wheat. Please pause and process that number. Prices did not just double or triple. They exploded by orders of magnitude. This was not because wheat became abundant, it was because the currency became worthless. The middle class of Rome was obliterated. Soldiers demanded higher wages to keep up with inflation, forcing more printing. In 301 AD, Emperor Diocletian tried to stop the cycle with the Edict on Maximum Prices. He set strict legal limits on what merchants could charge for goods and mandated the death penalty for anyone who violated them. Did it work? Of course not. Economic laws supersede imperial decrees. Merchants simply stopped bringing goods to market because they could not sell them at a loss. Goods disappeared. Black markets thrived. And the complex economy of the empire disintegrated into primitive barter. The wealthy moved to their fortified country estates operating independently of the state, while the urban middle class starved. By 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire didn't just fall to barbarians, it collapsed from within because its economic engine had been destroyed by currency debasement. As you hear this history, tell me in the comments, do you see the parallels? Does the bread and circuses of Rome remind you of anything happening in America today? I read every comment, and I want to know if you see the rhyme. But perhaps you believe the ancient world is too distant. So let us look at the industrial precedent of Weimar Germany. Many skeptics dismiss the Roman example, claiming that the ancient world is not relevant to our modern high-tech society. We have computers, they say. We have central banks. We are sophisticated. So let us look at Weimar Germany in the early 20th century. Before World War I, Germany was arguably the most advanced nation on Earth. They led the world in physics, chemistry, engineering, and philosophy. They had a solid banking system and a currency, the mark, backed by gold. Then came the war. To fund the massive cost of World War I, Germany abandoned the gold standard and turned to the printing press, believing they would pay off the debt with the spoils of victory. They lost. Stage 1 ended in 1914. Stage 2 ran from 1914 to 1919. Then came the Treaty of Versailles, imposing a debt of 132 billion gold marks on a shattered nation. It was a sum that was mathematically impossible to pay. Germany faced a choice: default and face invasion, or print paper money to buy foreign currency and pay the debt. They chose to print. The speed of that collapse serves as a grim warning for us today. In 1918, shortly after the war, 4.2 German marks bought $1. It was a weakened but functional exchange rate. By November 1923, just 5 years later, it took 4.2 trillion marks to buy $1. The inflation was so rapid that it defied comprehension. A cup of coffee, ordered for 5,000 marks, might cost 8,000 marks by the time you finished drinking it. Workers were paid twice a day and given time off immediately to rush to the shops, because the money earned in the morning would lose half its value by evening. The most tragic aspect was the destruction of the prudent middle class. Imagine a German couple who had saved for 40 years. They had put money away every month, denying themselves luxuries, planning for a comfortable retirement. Let's say they had saved 500,000 marks, a small fortune in 1918, enough to buy a beautiful home and live off the interest. By 1923, that life savings of 500,000 marks would not purchase a single loaf of bread. Their lifetime of labor was stolen, not by a burglar, but by the government's monetary policy. However, notice the pattern again. Not everyone lost. Those who understood what was happening borrowed heavily in marks to buy hard assets like factories, land, and machinery. When the currency collapsed, they paid off their loans with worthless paper, owning the real assets free and clear. The wealth transferred from the savers to the asset holders. And for those who think this cannot happen in the modern era, we must look at Venezuela. There's a dangerous tendency among Americans to believe in American exceptionalism, the idea that economic laws apply to other countries but not to the United States. To counter this, we must look at Venezuela. In the year 2000, Venezuela was not a poor nation. It sat upon the largest proven oil reserves in the world, more than Saudi Arabia. It had a functioning democracy, a growing middle class, and a currency that was relatively stable. It was the envy of South America. But populist politics took over. The government expanded social programs massively, funding them with oil revenues. When oil prices dipped, the revenue vanished, but the spending commitments remained. Stage 2 began. They started printing money to fill the gap. They told the people it was temporary. They blamed foreign imperialists. They blamed greedy shopkeepers. But they kept printing. By 2016, inflation hit 800%. By 2019, it hit 10 million percent. In a modern 21st century economy with internet and smartphones, people were reduced to foraging for food. The bolivar became less valuable than the virtual gold in the video game World of Warcraft. Professionals, doctors, lawyers, engineers saw their earnings evaporate. Those who kept their wealth in Venezuelan bolivars lost 100% of it. Those who converted their wealth to US dollars, gold, or real estate survived. The mechanism of the collapse was identical to Rome and Germany. The only difference was the date. Now, having seen the pattern in history, we must turn our eyes to the United States and face our own reality in 2025. Stage 1 for the US dollar was established in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference. The US emerged from WWF as the world's superpower, owning the vast majority of the world's gold. The dollar was pegged to gold at $35 an ounce, and every other currency was pegged to the dollar. It was a solid foundation. Stage 2 began on August 15, 1971. President Richard Nixon, facing the costs of the Vietnam War and domestic spending programs, temporarily suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold. He closed the gold window. At that moment, the dollar ceased to be money and became a currency. It was no longer a claim on a hard asset. It was a claim on the faith and credit of the U.S. government. Since 1971, the printing press has been running. In 1971, the U.S. national debt was roughly $398 billion. Today, it is over $36.2 trillion. That is a 9,000% increase. The M2 money supply, a measure of the cash and checking deposits in the system, has exploded from $600 billion to over $21 trillion. For decades, we did not feel the full sting of this debasement because of a unique advantage. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency. This is what the French finance minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing called our exorbitant privilege. Because the world needed dollars to buy oil, the petrodollar system, and to conduct international trade. We could print trillions of dollars and they would be absorbed by foreign central banks and global markets. We effectively exported our inflation to the rest of the world. We got cheap goods, they got our paper. But that privilege is ending. We have entered stage 3. The world is waking up. We are seeing the rapid de-dollarization of the global economy. China, Russia, India, Brazil, and even our allies like Saudi Arabia are beginning to settle trade in non-dollar currencies. They are buying gold at record rates. Central banks bought over 1,000 tons of gold in 2023 alone. They are preparing for the end of the dollar era. As global demand for dollars drops, all those trillions of printed dollars will have nowhere to go but back home. And when they come home, they will ignite domestic inflation unlike anything we have seen in our lifetimes. You might be wondering if there is an escape route, but we must understand the trap that makes a painless exit impossible. This is the most critical point to understand. The Federal Reserve is trapped. They are checkmated. In the past, when inflation rose, the Fed could raise interest rates to 5%, 10%, or even 20%, as Paul Volcker did in 1980, to cool the economy and kill inflation. But in 1980, the US debt was roughly 30% of GDP. Today, it is over 120% of GDP. When you have $36 trillion in debt, you cannot have high interest rates. In 2024, the US government spent over $1.1 trillion just on interest payments on the debt. That is more than the entire defense budget. It is more than Medicare. If the Fed keeps rates high, the interest payments will consume the entire federal budget, forcing the government to default. But if they lower rates to save the government from default, they unleash the inflation monster again. They have to choose between defaulting on the debt, which destroys the banking system, or inflating away the debt, which destroys the currency. History tells us they will always choose inflation. It is the politically easier path. It is the path of the boiling frog. They will choose to sacrifice the value of the dollar to save the nominal solvency of the government. This brings us back to that terrifying number I started with. The 127 million Americans who are about to lose everything. Who are they? They are the holders of paper promises. This group encompasses the vast majority of the baby boomer generation. It includes anyone whose primary wealth is stored in savings accounts earning nominal interest while real inflation erodes their purchasing power. It includes those holding treasury bonds or municipal bonds, contracts to be paid back in future dollars that will be worth significantly less. It includes the millions of Americans relying on fixed pensions that pay a set amount per month, an amount that might pay the bills today but will barely cover groceries in a hyperinflationary future. And it includes everyone counting on Social Security, the ultimate unfunded liability where the checks may continue to arrive, but they will not buy what you need them to buy. If we experience a stage 4 collapse, whether through hyperinflation or a deflationary depression where the banks fail, these 127 million people will see their lifetime of accumulation evaporate. The number in your bank account might stay the same. I want to prove this with real data from you. Go to the comments and tell me the price of a gallon of milk or a dozen eggs in your state right now compared to 3 years ago. Let's create a record of real inflation right here in this video, not the government numbers. But before we address the myths that keep people asleep, we must confront the psychological and mechanical reasons why this wealth transfer is so effective and so invisible until it is too late. There are two powerful forces working against the average American saver right now. One is psychological, and the other is structural. The psychological force is known as normalcy bias. This is a survival mechanism that has evolved in the human brain over thousands of years. It causes people to underestimate the possibility of a disaster and its potential effects. When we have lived through 40 years of relative stability, as most of the baby boomer generation has since the inflationary spikes of the 1970s, our brains become hardwired to believe that stability is the permanent state of the world. We assume that because the grocery stores were full yesterday, they will be full tomorrow. We assume that because the dollar was accepted yesterday, it will be accepted tomorrow. This bias is dangerous because it causes a delay in reaction time. In a crisis, the survivors are those who react before the danger is obvious. Normalcy bias convinces you to wait until the smoke is filling the room before you look for the exit. But in a financial collapse, by the time the smoke is visible to everyone, the exits are already welded shut. The capital controls are in place. The withdrawal limits are activated. The gold is sold out. The normalcy bias is the anesthesia that keeps the patient calm while the amputation is performed. Look around your own circle of friends. How many of them are actually prepared? How many are living in this normalcy bias? Let me know if you're the only one in your circle who sees this coming. The second force, the structural one, is even more insidious. It is called the Cantillon Effect. Named after the 18th century economist Richard Cantillon, this principle explains exactly how the wealth is transferred from you to the political and financial elite during a period of inflation. Most people think of inflation as a general rise in prices, like water rising in a bathtub. But that is not how it works. Money enters the economy at specific injection points, usually through the banking system and government contracts. When the Federal Reserve prints $1 trillion, they do not drop it from helicopters equally onto every lawn in America. They They give it to the banks, the government, and the large corporations first. These first receivers get to spend this new money while prices are still low. They use this printed cash to buy up hard assets, stocks, real estate, commodities, and companies. Their buying pressure drives up the price of those assets. This is why we see the stock market hitting all-time highs even as the real economy crumbles. It is not economic growth. It is asset price inflation caused by the first wave of printed money. By the time this new money filters down through the economy to you, in the form of your wages, your pension, or your Social Security check, the damage has already been done. The prices of housing, food, energy, and insurance have already risen to reflect the new money supply. You, the last receiver, are paying the higher prices that were bid up by the first receivers. This mechanism is essentially a hidden tax. It is a legal form of counterfeiting that transfers purchasing power from the saver to the spender, from the employee to the asset owner, and from the citizen to the government. It explains why the gap between the rich and the poor is accelerating so violently. The rich own the assets that the printed money flows into. The middle class holds the currency that the printed money dilutes. Understanding the Cantillon Effect is crucial because it shatters the illusion that you can save your way to safety in a fiat currency system. You are running on a treadmill that is being speeded up by the central bank. You cannot outsave a printing press that is diluting your labor in real time. The only way to win is to step off the treadmill entirely, to stop storing your life energy in the currency that is being weaponized against you. I know that, as you read this, your mind is likely generating defenses. Let's address the myths that keep people from seeing the truth. The first myth is the belief that this time is different. This is the most dangerous phrase in finance. Every civilization thought they were special. The Romans thought their empire was eternal because it was ordained by the gods. The British thought the sun would never set on their empire. The sentiment of "it can't happen here" is actually a symptom of the collapse. The laws of mathematics do not care about our optimism. When debt exceeds the ability to repay, failure is inevitable. The second myth is that the US dollar is the reserve currency, so we are safe. Being the reserve currency does not make us immune. It just means the bubble can get bigger before it bursts. The average lifespan of a global reserve currency is roughly 94 years. The dollar has been the dominant reserve currency for about 80 years. We are in the twilight of this cycle. When reserve currencies fail, they tend to fail violently because the entire world rushes for the exit at the same time. The third myth is the hope that technology will save us. We hear this from the optimists in Silicon Valley. AI and robotics will create so much abundance that the debt won't matter. While technology does create deflationary pressure, making things cheaper, it cannot outrun the printing press. Technology creates wealth, currency printing redistributes it. If the government prints money faster than technology lowers costs, prices will still rise. Weimar Germany was the high-tech hub of its day. It did not save them. So, what can you actually do to position yourself on the right side of this wealth transfer? I am not a financial advisor, and I cannot give you specific investment advice for your situation. But I can tell you what the historical record shows. I can tell you what the smart money is doing right now. Wealth is never truly destroyed in a collapse. It is merely transferred. It moves from the unprepared to the prepared. It moves from paper to reality. First, you must understand that cash is a liability. In normal times, cash is king. In a currency collapse, cash is a melting ice cube. Holding large amounts of cash is a guarantee that you will lose purchasing power. You need liquidity for emergencies, but you must stop viewing a savings account as a vehicle for wealth preservation. Second, you need to own hard assets. The only hedge against the debasement of fiat currency is the ownership of assets that cannot be printed. This means gold and silver, the only forms of money that have survived for 5,000 years. They are not investments to make you rich. They are insurance to keep you from becoming poor. Central banks are buying gold, and you should ask yourself why. This also means real estate, productive land, farmland, or residential property in stable areas, and business equity in companies that produce the real goods and services people need regardless of the economy. Third, you must reduce counterparty risk. This is a fancy way of saying, don't rely on someone else's promise. If your wealth is in a pension fund, you are relying on the fund's solvency. If your wealth is in the bank, you are relying on the bank's solvency. Direct ownership of assets eliminates this risk. If you hold physical gold, there is no counterparty. If you own your home free and clear, there is no landlord or bank that can take it. Finally, invest in yourself and your community. In a true reset, social capital becomes as important as financial capital. Skills, relationships, and community networks are vital. The ability to repair, to build, to grow food, to heal, these retain value when the currency does not. In conclusion, the purpose of this message is not to induce fear, but clarity. The United States is following a script that has been written and rewritten for centuries. We have completed stage 1. We have completed stage 2. We are deep into stage 3. The transition to stage 4, the reset, is not a possibility. It is a certainty. The only variables are when and how fast. 127 million Americans are walking blindly into this buzzsaw because they are looking at the world through the lens of the last 40 years, not the lens of the last 2,000 years. They are trusting in institutions that are mathematically insolvent. You have a choice today. You can continue to believe the myths. You can trust that the politicians who created this debt will somehow fix it. You can hope that the laws of mathematics will suspend themselves for America's benefit. Or you can look at the data. You can look at history. And you can take steps to move your wealth from the side of the ledger that is being destroyed to the side that will be preserved. History is relentless. It will roll over those who ignore it. But for those who respect it, it offers a roadmap to survival. I urge you to study this pattern, to look at your own portfolio and to ask yourself, if the dollar loses 50% of its value in the next 3 years, do I still have a life? Make sure the answer is yes. If you found value in this analysis, I have one request. Don't just like this video, share it with one person you care about who needs to wake up. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what is the one step you're going to take this week to prepare? I want to see a community of action takers below. Thank you for listening. We are running out of time, and knowledge is the only shield we have left.